Okay. Well, hello and welcome to the 3PGC webinars. My name is Stephanie Benedetto, and welcome to the Three Principles Global Community webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, or 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that is committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles as introduced by Sydney Banks to people like you throughout the world. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to our guest speakers today, Christian McNeill and Barbara Sarah Smith. They will talk with us about the power of being of service. And Christian and Barbara each had an extensive 12-step recovery experience, and they were drawn to the common sense and practical nature of each other's sharing of the principles. In 2019, they seamlessly and effortlessly wrote their book that's called Addiction, One Cause, One Solution, Recovery from the Inside Out. Their intention was to create a simple primer on the three principles paradigm for the addiction and recovery community in the spirit of service. So we'll be talking about service today. Welcome. Thank you. And now over to you, Christian and Barbara.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. Thanks so much. It's really nice to meet you, and thank you for that introduction. I'm good. We had a quick discussion at the top of the hour, or before the top of the hour, and decided that I would kick off. And there are some people I recognise on the call, but quite a few I don't. So I'll just say a little bit about my background, how I came across the principles, and also how I came across Barbara. And I kind of stumbled across the principles in 2011 at the start of that year. And at that time, I had been sober for a long time. I'd been sober since my 20s. And I had found myself. I'm just to be really clear. I'm a great fan of 12-step recovery. I'm not one of these people that wants to sort of diss it or anything like that. But because it really saved my life. But I was struggling in recovery, and I found myself just constantly striving for a kind of happiness that seemed to elude me, and I realized that I realized that something just wasn't quite right for me, and I began long before I stumbled across the principles. I began to have spontaneous insights, and the relevance of those and the significance of those has become much clearer to me since I stumbled across the principles. But I began to realize that I really had to put listening to myself, to my own inner voice, at the heart of everything, over and above following any kind of program, no matter how excellent the program might be or not. And I had one or two other kind of significant insights that kind of lightened up my life a bit. And I was doing some training in NLP, and I found that very interesting, and I found it more promising than anything else I'd come across, because in these years of recovery, I had this kind of secret side gig of my mental health, improving my mental health. And one of the things that was always kind of getting in my way, I think, was that I was pathologizing every low mood as some kind of evidence of not being sober minded, or being mentally unstable or something like that. I mean, today I just think that's nonsense. It's just that, but that's how it felt at the time. And every time that I went through some kind of struggle, I felt that this was evidence of pathology or evidence of my addictive personality, and that I had to kind of take some action on it, or learn some new skill, or get some new practice into my life. So my secret side gig was becoming bigger and bigger all the time, with requirements for meditation and journaling and morning pages and working with others and going to meetings and so on and so forth. Anyway, and lots of trainings in other modalities. So I went on this, what I thought was an NLP weekend, and I discovered that, in fact, it was about the three principles. It was an introduction to the three principles with Jamie Smart and Aaron Turner. And it just hit me like a train, absolutely. I think I was just ripe for it, perhaps, and the nature of the training was just such. The nature of the experience was really incredible, and for the first time, I think, in my adult life, I heard something said along the lines of, "You're not broken, nobody's broken," and I knew that that was true, and it was a complete sort of vault fast for me. It was a complete turnaround because up until that point, I had been seeing myself, because of my history of addiction, as somebody who was broken, and I'd felt that that admission of brokenness was a sort of sign of humility. That was, and that it was a necessary sign of humility if I was going to recover. And it just suddenly dissolved in nanoseconds. And somebody else, I don't know who, at the weekend spoke about how everybody kind of goes up and down and up and down and up and down in their thinking and their feeling, and thought and feeling being two sides of one coin. And again, at the relief, the recognition of myself, that is just the nature of being, that at times I get caught up in my thinking, and at times it falls away, and that there was nowhere to get to. That was just that. I'm already doing that. It's okay. I've always been okay. Everybody's always okay. It was absolutely huge. I felt that the 20 years of striving came to an end, and it's a strange thing, isn't it? Because it isn't that I've stopped learning or being interested or going to call webinars such as this, or more intense trainings, or working with a mentor. It isn't that any of that's gone, but it doesn't. I am no longer doing that kind of thing just in order to be okay, to sort of earn my place on the planet or something like that. It's purely out of interest and passion and curiosity. It's no longer a necessity. So things just changed very quickly for me after that. And at that point, I was a lawyer. I was actually a judge in our tribunal system, and was expected to be there for the rest of my working life, really. It wasn't a job that I loved, but I was very grateful for it, and it was a very comfortable job, if you like. But within months, actually, of that training, my father had died, and that was an extraordinary experience. It was really quite extraordinary. It happened very suddenly when nobody was expecting it, but it was an incredibly touching and bonding and spiritual experience, really. And the following year, my mother died, and I had some very odd health problems that were quite serious, and took me into hospital twice. I mean, I hadn't been in hospital since my children were born. They were teenagers at that time, and my life, it was as if I was just sort of picked up and turned around, sent off in a different direction. And within 2 years of that, I was no longer in the job in law, and I was exploring working as a coach and a facilitator, and I was attempting to bring this work back to Scotland, where I live. I live in Glasgow, in Scotland, and that's the path that I've been on ever since then. And one of the our talk title, just remind ourselves, is the power of being of service. And when I started this work as a coach, a facilitator, it was a very different role from having been employed in the public sector as I was in law. So I took on all sorts of ideas about what was required to be a coach and to build a practice, and that kind of thing. And they weren't all terribly successful, and I didn't enjoy them very much at all. I'm not much of a marketer. I don't particularly enjoy that, but people would say things like, "Well, that's just your thinking," and I think, "Oh, you're right enough. So it is that I should just do it and get on with it, and sort of suck it up. It is just my thinking. What does it matter?" But I came to see after a few years that this thing about being of service, that for me, it's a sort of willingness to be of service, but it isn't just the three principles aren't just one principle. It's not just about thought. It's also about tuning into what I might call the higher power or mind or the universal energy. It's tuning into that and being open to where what what's my role today? What am I being guided towards? And gradually, or maybe not so gradually, I really let go of all that and came to a place of uh, allowing opportunities to come to me and seeing whether they felt attractive, whether I felt drawn to them, and allowing clients to come to me, and I now find myself in just a much more comfortable place, and a place where I feel sort of um, much useful, or where it doesn't feel effortful, where that for me, and one aspect of that being of service is being of service to the voice within. It's rather than anybody else's good ideas about marketing, which may be fantastic for them, by the way. I'm not knocking what anybody else is doing, but it's just recognizing that it, each of us, I think, has our own unique capacities and our own unique offerings. Anyway, one of those fortuitous kind of opportunities came in meeting Barbara, who you're going to hear from in just a moment. And we were both. Barbara has her own different, completely different perspective on recovery, because she comes from a different side of that particular issue. But we were both speakers on a podcast by Harry Durbetsky and Greg Suki, and I listened to Barbara, and I knew she knew what she was talking about, because I have heard people in the three principles community talk about addiction as in a way that just doesn't ring true to me. And although I know that the thing that makes people crave whatever their substance is or whatever their behaviors, I know that is coming, that is powered by thought, but it's not to underestimate that, what that the power of that thought, until when one is caught up in it. It's only when there's a moment of insight, it seems to me, that recovery comes about. If one has really lost control of taking more and more, when you've taken I'll talk about drinks, since that was my main thing. But if you've lost that control, as I had, and if you've also lost the ability to stay stopped after you have stopped for a period, that's my understanding of addiction, that loss of control thing. And just hearing talk about thought, or having a positive attitude, or anything like that, it didn't do it for me. I woke up on a daily basis at the end of my drinking, promising myself that I wouldn't drink that day, and finding myself in the pub by lunchtime. It was and baffled by it. And it wasn't even as though I was fighting myself to go to get to the pub. It was like I became a different person a few hours later. And the thing that got me out of that way back when in my 20s was I had a moment of clarity, a moment of insight, literally in the gutter in Edinburgh city centre, when I knew that the gig was up. I couldn't do it anymore. But it wasn't willpower or a decision or anything else. Something huge happened that completely removed that loss of control thing, or it just took away the need to drink. And it happened in a nanosecond, and I haven't had to drink since. But I obviously, it's only in retrospect that the power of that becomes obvious. Anyway, to come back to meeting Barbara, I could tell from listening to her that she was someone who, I really respected what she was saying. I knew that this was someone who was sharing from her own profound experience and many years of experience, and I really wanted to connect with her. And we connected and had a number of conversations, and I visited her in her home in the Azores. And around about the same time, we both shared that we were thinking of writing something about the application of the three principles to addiction, or how it could help with recovery. And that's been my experience. Bringing the two together has been absolutely superb. since I stumbled across the principles, I have been living an extraordinary life. I've had now 12 years of just contentment with its ups and downs, but 12 years of contentment. Anyway, somehow one of us decided or suggested that why don't we join forces and write something together, which is exactly what we've done. I'm just going to show you a copy of our book quickly, available on Amazon. And yeah, that we published that just at the very start of lockdown. So that's how that went. But actually, we've had some lovely, lovely reviews, and it was an extraordinary process writing. A real privilege to work with Barbara. And Barbara, I think that's enough out of me for now, and I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a bit about your story and whatever the rest of it.
That's great. Thank you, Christian. Well, let's see, my story. Like Christian alluded to, I am not in 12-step recovery personally, but I am a clinical social worker. I've been in the field for almost 45 years now. It's a little hard to believe, but about 10 years ago, much of that time I worked with addicts, with recovering addicts. And about 10, 12 years ago, longer than that, probably maybe 15 years ago, I really started to get so disillusioned with the work that I was doing that I had loved my entire life. But it just seemed like we were treading water. Like, I was listening to the same stories. It felt like I was treating a generation of victims. People rarely, if ever, got better. I mean, that wasn't even part of the consciousness that addicts could really get better. They might do well for a period of time, but they had to have this tremendous vigilance for the rest of their lives in case, they slipped up, and then they'd have to start all over again. And I kept hearing, I worked with many, many people who sort of were on the edges of 12-step recovery, and I would try to point them towards the great wisdom and help them, as they say in the program, take what you like and leave the rest. So I'd encourage them to look for what was good and helpful, which is absolutely the community, unlike any other in the world, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, a community of people in every country of the world who've been there and done that and got that t-shirt in several colors and sizes, and who will help, are there to help and be of service to other recovering and struggling addicts. So I started hearing things, particularly around heroin addiction and opiate addiction, that it was incurable. Most of our clients in the treatment center that I was working with in Washington, D.C. were what we call retreads. There's a local treatment center here in Massachusetts, and they would call it the spin dry cycle. It was just sort of assumed that people weren't going to do better, and that, in fact, in many cases, it was just plain incurable because it was so complex and so difficult. And so in the field of addiction, there are now, many, many, many diagnoses, as there are in mental health. And the more you can sort of load up addicts or anyone in seeking mental health treatment with a number of diagnoses, the better reimbursement you can get, the more care they can get. And so the whole lens through which we were looking at people was that they had all these things wrong with them. They had all these pathologies going on. And for the most part, there wasn't really much they could do. They were wounded, they were damaged goods, they were damaged for life. And it was pretty depressing, and so I felt like I was, people would come and unload their difficulties on me, and I would try to bolster them up. But a lot of times it was just sort of like pouring water through sand, trying to give advice just went out the window. Nobody really listened. Nobody paid attention, and nobody followed through. And I was just getting more and more frustrated and more questioning, what the heck are we doing in this field? Because when I was a young puppy in graduate school in the 70s, we weren't allowed to diagnose people. It was considered a no-no. I mean, that would follow someone for life. And so now here we are diagnosing people with everything under the sun. Everybody's got something. If you really go listen at a dinner table with a bunch of friends, they'll throw around about 5 or 6 diagnoses, because that's the lens through which we're looking at ourselves and each other these days. And so this understanding really, for me, I got to the point of being just completely and totally burned out, and I was getting ready to leave the field. And at that point, because I really needed to keep working, synchronicity brought my way a colleague and a friend who suggested that I talk with someone who had, quote unquote, really changed her life. And I thought, you're right, okay. Yeah. So if skepticism were, measurable, it would have been off the scales. I really thought, okay, but we did end up talking to that person. That person was Annika Hurwitz, who is a psychologist who works closely with Keith Blevins and the single paradigm. And Annika just started talking in that first conversation about things like wisdom and common sense and intuition. And I thought, well, that's different. This is different. And it really called to me. And even though I had 40 plus years at that point of psychobabble or, psychological chitter chatter in my head and this whole lens to see differently, I just knew something was there. And I stayed with it and ultimately had a very profound insight as a result of an intensive, a 4-day intensive that I went on with Annika up in Maine. And that changed everything. And I came back to my practice the day after the intensive. I had a waiting room full of people and a full caseload. And I just, in a very awkward, and I felt like I was walking on uneven ground because I didn't really even understand what had happened to me. I just started talking about where feelings come from. And I would give people a choice. I would say, we can keep talking about the past and all these things that have happened to you, or we can sort of go in this direction. And just about all of them said, yeah, let's try that one. We haven't tried that yet. Let's try that. And I mean this sincerely, without exaggeration, within 6 weeks, 75% of my caseload had moved on happily. The mantra seemed to be, oh my God, I feel so much better. Why didn't anybody tell me this before? And I said, well, because we didn't know. We were trained classically to believe that both were true, that your thoughts had a great deal to do with it, which is why we have cognitive therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy and positive psychology and, you name it. But we also would take these extensive histories to look at all the reasons why your life experiences created your unhappiness. So turning that boat around was not easy for a lot of people, but for most people, it was just like, oh, this is great. And you mean I don't have to do anything? Like Christian was saying, you mean I don't have to go to meetings and do this and go to meditation and, go to classes and do, no, you don't. Actually, you're already all set up. You've got everything you need. And it was such a relief for most people. So to take that into the service piece of this, I think I, like Christian, I believe if people were honest, everybody who learns the principles would fess up to. When you first learn this, it's kind of like a reformed smoker. You can be really obnoxious. I was going to save the world with this. This was the key to world peace. You know, we were going to turn the world around. And certainly the world of psychology would welcome this, because everybody that I knew in the field was pretty burned out and crispy and ready for a change. So I just became this zealot of sharing the principles, and drove a lot of people away. And again, I think if people are honest, they'll say they've lost a lot of friends over this. And I have, since that time, over 10 years ago, I have really come to see that being of service, a new way of being of service. And that is much more in alignment, I think, with 12-step recovery, which is that it is really more a program of attraction than it is a promotion. That it really doesn't matter what comes out of my mouth. It really matters how ready the person is to receive the message. And so and this has been true throughout my career, things that came out of my mouth that I thought were just, incredibly brilliant, just went totally past people. And yet other things, like the time that my dog accidentally punched me in the eye, seemed to change people's life, Now that wasn't about me. That was, again, about the receptive nature of change. When we're ready and open to hearing something new, we're much more likely, I think, to have, well, that's the only way we ever have an impact. And so being of service is certainly a part of every faith community, of every religion. The spiritual nature of giving away the gifts that we have. It's certainly a great part of 12-step recovery, that you have to give it away in order to keep it. But how we do that, I think, has really evolved for me. I now can see that my greatest service to people is when people are ready, I can find a way to make things happen for them. To make, if they don't have money to afford my services, I certainly will work with them in whatever way I can, or barter with them, or whatever works for them. There are people I don't charge, young people who are so turned off by psychotherapy and so tired of being pointed to all the things that are wrong with them, that I'll just meet them on the beach and we'll just talk about, Taylor Swift. And just that presence, without ever trying to convince them of anything, is so powerful and is of such tremendous service. When I just live, or as they say in the AA, when I just walk my walk instead of just talking my talk, when I am embodying these principles that I now know are the foundation of the way my human experience works, and I let go of perceived wrongs, and I wake up on a moment-to-moment basis to, well, that didn't go very well. Let's try that. Let's try something else here. That is contagious. And I believe in the contagion of these principles when we are just really in alignment with wanting to help, wanting to be of service, but without trying to push the envelope and force an outcome. but just really in our truest heart. And I believe most three principles practitioners, as were all, by the way, all of my colleagues in the field of psychology, we would have given anything to see our folks get better. Unfortunately, we were just working with a model that wasn't working because it wasn't foundationally true. So when we can live this work and be human and be real, I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect human or a perfect sharing, or, you know, I'm always reviewing what I might be able to do better. My greatest shortcoming, I would say, when it comes to sharing the principles is that I tend to be too enthusiastic too quickly, and that can drive people away. And patience is not one of my strong suits when it comes to something that I'm so charged up about, but I'm getting better at it, and I am getting to be a better listener. And I think just that is of great service. I have a magnet on my refrigerator that says what people need is a good listening to. So just to listen to people without any agenda to convince them of anything or to change the way they work or they are going about things, just to listen and to say, well, yeah, maybe, you know. I think that often, if someone has any curiosity, that often is enough to, you know, for them to then pursue that. So I guess that's how my vision of service has evolved over the last 10 years. And it's continuing to evolve. It's continuing to, I think, to mature and to be more listening than this idea, you know, the sort of ego-driven initial outpouring that a lot of people have when they just want to go and change the whole world with this and convince people of something that they're not able to see yet at their level of understanding. So I think that's about all I have to share here. I don't know where we want to go from here, whether Stephanie, you want to open it up for questions or comments, or whether you want us to keep talking.
Well, let's see what your beautiful guests here have to say. So if you have a question for Barbara and Christian, or perhaps what are you hearing? Like, what's resonating with you as true? What are you seeing new and fresh? Feel free to raise your hand, and we'll be happy to call upon you. Andrea. Yes, did I say it properly the time?
It's all good. So greetings, thank you. I think you've noticed me doing a lot of nodding. It's really, really refreshing to hear this. I bet somewhere in this is going to be a question. So your response or thoughts is going to be just fine, but I'm just going to kind of share a couple of my thoughts. I've been in this community, the three principle community, for a long time. And well before there were any, you know, God, it's just, there's so much going on now, all the podcasts and all the different things. You mentioned, I think you two met kind of on one, which I listened to that podcast as well. Yeah, but I too, my history too is like I had a bad, what we would call, you know, looked like a bad case of alcoholism, you know, in my early 20s, and found AA in 1985, and yeah, it was very helpful. Had kind of one of those experiences of it sounds similar, that what I would now, you know, what we might hear call, you know, my innate power I just got enough of the blockage or the something out of the way, that enough got out of the way, and I was freed, and I was set free from having to drink. So, then I came to the three principle understanding in 1995, when 10 years later, when my life was crashing and burning again. I was still sober, but yeah, a lot wasn't working. A lot wasn't working about my understanding of being a good AA. And how I put that now, I do, just by the way, I still have many friends who are in AA. I still occasionally attend meetings, but I have a very different relationship than I did in 1985. Anyhow, but I often share, I thought it was kind of about collecting merit badges. I wouldn't have said that at the time, but in hindsight, how many years do you have? How long was your 4-step? How many sponsees do you have? How many service positions do you have? And collecting these merit badges. And then if you're called on to share in a meeting for 3 minutes, you talk about your merit badges or something. And that no longer was making sense, because my life was a mess and I had lots of merit badges. In a way, fortunately, I knew this is what's so beautiful about why I've been nodding my head so much. And I could not attend this conversation when I saw the title of it, about being of service. So I knew those two things from my 10 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, which was service is a big deal. Service can work some magic. Being willing to have not so much a discipline of being of service, but having eyeballs to look for opportunities to be of service, to have a mindset. And it seems apparent to me that the founders of AA understood that beyond anything else that they understood. The 12 steps were written as a last minute quick, let's throw them in the book. They didn't. There's so many myths around all that stuff. But man, they understood being of service can open the door to some freedom. And how I would say now is just kind of point me in the direction of my innate well-being. It's very much connected to a mindset and a stance in life of being of service. So anyway, I had that. And then I also have this understanding of being of service, and this understanding of your own resources are coming up short. Don't try working harder, trying harder. In a sense, go to God, go to mind, go to whatever that is greater than me and my own personal resources. And those two things, I found, I heard, Sid Banks talks about that all the time. So I love that in the three principles, we're beginning to talk more about the spirit of humility, the tenet, the stance of being interested in humility, which of course kind of embraces the stance of being very interested in being of service. I don't know. I feel very grateful for I also do a lot of work with folks. I hate to even call it work, who have many decades of sobriety, and who will either chat or they'll hear me or something and say, something's going on with you. What's up? And I'll share. And the last thing I'll say is, I often don't say, let me share the three principles with you. Let's talk about thought, consciousness, and mind, and see how that, it's so beneficial to me in deepening my own grounding in this understanding. And I think beneficial in terms of sharing, because I too can get a little evangelical, because I'm excited about the growth and the evolution of what the three principles offers, this understanding. Anyway, and bit of getting away from the jargon and really getting to the heart of the matter. And often it's easier when I'm almost forced to do that. When someone has approached me around recovery, and sometimes they have, Alcoholics Anonymous behind them, it's been a good thing to not get stuck in our little community's verbiage and stuff. It has forced me to get to the meat of what am I really trying to say here? That when I'm sharing and understanding. So I've too just seen people just set free from stuff that they've been working on for decades, and they're no longer working on it, because that's a merit badge too, right? Oh, I'm working on it, man. I got to do the work, It's like people. Oh, boy, that's just.
I love that merit badge. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll hold on to that one. That's great. That's
Yeah, well,
great.
thanks.
That was absolutely wonderful, Andrea. Thank you for sharing all of that. And one of the areas, and it's kind of a thing that has prompted this talk, or the title, is one of the things that I have found in the last couple of years is just that working with people in recovery, and when I say working, that is, as you know, unpaid, obviously, and conversations and not using the jargon. But I've discovered that there were many women like me who were kind of struggling, and I think it's because they had innocent misunderstandings of what was expected of them and what was available. But those have been some of the richest conversations, and there's a number of people that in my sphere at the moment that are very interested in this work, and the conversations that we have are incredible. And I've also sent them resources from some of our colleagues, that podcasts and things like that, and I think it's such an opportunity. And I don't think this just applies to people who are in recovery. I think there's such an opportunity to blossom where you're planted. I've had this conversation with Kathy Casey on occasions about sometimes people think that they have to change job, change role, in order to share this work. And I'm really passionate about getting out in the world, and I think often people have far more opportunity to share with the folk that are around them. They don't need to make a big change. I mean, maybe they will. I did, as it happened, but it's not that you can't do that. But I think it's there is so much opportunity for that to be done, and I'm really very I'm just very keen to support anybody who's thinking about that. I'm delighted that the 3PGC in recent years has been offering an apprentice program, and it's just ridiculously cheap. It's something like $100 a year or $120 a year. And I came up with this idea the other day. I thought that I send out a sort of quarterly newsletter, and I thought I'm going to offer to mentor someone, for who's on that program if they want to. So they have their own kind of one-to-one alongside that, and I'm going to just charge the same for the year, and somebody who had actually prompted the whole idea of offering mentorship contacted me today and took me up on that offer. So, I'm delighted, and it's that thing of, as you say, being open to turning to God, looking for the guidance from the higher power. What's the inspiration, and kind of going with that and playing with that, not being too attached to it. And if it goes somewhere, great. But I really enjoyed your contribution, and we'll have to connect offline. It sounds like we've got very similar stories. Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to come in? I think you have to raise your hand. Is that right, Stephanie?
You can do that, or you can just go ahead and unmute if you want. It's a little easier for us to, or at least for me to see you if you raise your hand. Aha, Bruce. Yes. Hi.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Yeah, I really resonated with all that's been said, because I got introduced to recovery in 1982, and then to the three principles about 3 or 4 years later. I was fortunate in Minneapolis to be around Joe Bailey, who wrote the Principles of Serenity, Christine Heath, and Keith Blevins. And I've maintained my relationship very strongly in recovery, because I feel it's payback time. And I work with healthcare providers, with family recovery, with military vets, first responders. And the three principles just interweave through all of that. And I think you two ladies had mentioned that you had written something and I didn't catch it. If so, put it in the chat, please. But probably the most profound thing that you shared, which I've realized after 4 decades, next month will be 41 for me, is just presence. I'm no longer trying to fix people, to over evangelize. I know you can be enthusiastic, as I am, about the three principles and how they support recovery, but just being a good listener and going on with 2 ears and 1 mouth and just showing up constantly. And to me, that's been extremely helpful. I'm fortunate that where I live in Colorado here, there's 2 ranches nearby, and one serves military vets and first responders with horse rescues, and the other is for recovery and mental health. And the animals just have that presence, and they read you like a book, and they don't bullshit. And that creates openings that then with presence, you can carry it further. So I'm just blessed because endless opportunities just unfold. And one thing that's become extremely meaningful to me later in my recovery process has been the ACA work, adult children of alcoholic/dysfunctional families. And when they added dysfunctional families to the title of the big red book, that excludes no one. So we all can show up. And that's where the original software was laid down. And we've got to go back and do a few delete, and rewrite that software. And that's where the 3 principles really come in. Because early on, the biggest revelation when I spent a weekend with Rick Suarez and Coral Gables was realizing that we all live in separate realities, and that our feelings could serve as a compass to redirecting us to our innate mental health and well-being. And that's really carried me a long way. So appreciate what you shared, and I'll now find your book with a connection. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say, Bruce, that we worked, both Christian and I worked with Joe Bailey. He was a mentor for both of us, and we actually pulled together the book. Part of the reason that we moved as quickly as we did was that Joe and Amy and a group of us were pulling together the big first international 3PGC, first international addictions and principles conference. And, it got postponed because of the pandemic, but we've worked very closely with Joe over the years, and we have a great deal of respect. And he wrote the big comment on the back of our book, and he's been a great supporter and a great friend to both of us over the years.
Yeah, well, Joe and I grew up in the Twin Cities, and we've shared a lot personally. And we went to competing colleges a year apart in the same conference. And so we have a lot of history and love for the Boundary Waters area along the Canadian border, and have spent time up there. So yeah, that's really special. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, Rich.
Well,
Richie.
Hi. Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Richie. Hi again.
We're almost neighbors.
Yes,
Hi,
we
Christian.
are.
Hi, Richie.
I'm loving what you have to say. My connection to the 12-step world is Overeaters Anonymous about 25, 30 years ago. And I thought I'd recovered. I recovered, and then I put on 20 or 30 pounds, and then I'd recover again on 20th. But I love what you've been saying, particularly about listening. What you need is a good listening. I love that. I think I've seen that on your wall. I love that. And when Bruce was somebody mentioned the Joe Bailey's book a couple weeks ago. A friend of a friend is going through some emotional stuff, but I know is in recovery.
Jonathan Felix.
Excuse me. So I went to give her your book because I loved your book. Your book was the second Three Principles book I have read, and I had given that out. But the other book that I found was The Serenity Principle by Joe Bailey, and she absolutely loved it. She got so turned on. And then I pointed her in the direction of Joe Bailey's website because he's got that whole seminar that you talked about, Barbara, online, and people can
Yes.
listen. I thought this is a wonderful combination of three principles and 12-step work. I mean, even the format of some of it, people talking about their recovery. So I got a couple questions. One question is, what would be a good way for me to, it's not really someone I know all that well, it's sort of like an acquaintance. But I know that she was turned on by the book, and I've reached out to her once. I haven't heard back from her. So I just curious, any suggestions you'd have about how to engage in a conversation with her. And the second question is around listening. I'm kind of an impatient person, and when there's silence, I want to jump in, or I want to suggest any suggestions you have about deepening listening, and or maybe there's a way to express that evokes more trust and allowing a person to talk more. That clear?
Sure. Why don't I take one of those, Christian? You take the other. How's that?
Okay. Yeah.
So let me go with the first one in terms of following up with people that you've given materials to. Again, at the beginning, I would sort of hound people. I mean, that sounds probably worse than it actually was, but I would regularly follow up. And I remember Annika, actually, I dropped out several times in working with Annika, and she kind of pulled me back in. She encouraged me to stay with it. And so I took that approach with people. And it didn't work out very well. Sometimes it does. Sometimes people go, oh yeah, I forgot. That's really helpful. Thanks for reaching out. But other times they experience it as you just want money, and you're just looking for work. And so, it's really in the ears of the beholder, Richie. I don't know that you can just sort of follow your gut and see what makes sense. But I think really I don't think there's any set way to do that. Sometimes reaching out to people and following up is helpful. And other times, again, they may see it in a very different way and pull back even further. So I remember hearing Michael Neal once saying that when after he had his intensive with George Pransky, I believe, they followed him, they encouraged him to stay in the conversation. And he thought that was just them looking for more money. So, again, we don't know how it's going to land with people, but it certainly is worth trying to reach out again. Just say, would you be interested in continuing our conversation? I think asking that question would be helpful. So, and Christian, I don't know if you have anything to add, or you want to tackle the listening one.
Well, I'll maybe move on to that. I recently, well, I say recently, probably in the last 6 months, did a deep listening workshop with Mavis Carn, who's a mentor and a dear friend, and the recording of it, and parts of it, because parts of it were breakout groups which were not recorded, but the recording of part of that's on my YouTube channel, and you can follow up. But the point about it is, it's something I've done before, but on this particular one, if you cut right to the chase, right at the end, the people who'd been involved were asked to share, and the first thing they shared about was what it was like not to be listened to. That's something, someone's there, but maybe they keep cutting and say, "Oh, what you mean is," and they completely misrepresent it, or whatever. There's any number of ways that people can appear to be present, but they're not listening. And it was so interesting that the kind of almost the depth of despair that people were sharing, it makes me feel worthless. And, and there's just asked in response to a simple question, how does it feel? Think of a time when you weren't listened to, and how did that feel? And then the second question was, think of a time when you were listened to, and how does that feel? And it was just extraordinary, the difference. I felt loved. I felt that I mattered. I felt affirmed. I felt connected. Every single person, I would say, had these contrasting experiences, and it seemed so that what was the difference between presence without deep listening versus deep listening shouldn't have been perhaps so big, but it is. And so that was a great convincer, if everyone was needed, of just how powerful that doing nothing but listening can be. And yeah, but feel free to have I can't remember if you were actually on that, but feel free to have a look at that, and you can even cut to the chase and just get the sense of it. Yeah.
I think I did do yours, and then was you're the one where the PowerPoints didn't work or something?
That's right. So despite the balls up with the PowerPoints, people seem to get something from it. The essence of the message.
Right. And then I did a little bit more research, and she's got a version of that on her website with the PowerPoints.
Yes.
So
I don't think the PowerPoints are crucial. Helpful, but not crucial.
crucial at all.
Yeah.
That I have a granddaughter that I was tutoring over from the time she was in the 8th grade through college. And a lot of it was for math, but a lot of the tutoring was just listening. And occasionally she will just call me and she'll just say to me, I just want to be listened to. I don't have to, I want to communicate, but she knows what's really important to her is just that I listen. And she really appreciates that. If she's going through a difficult time, I just want you to listen. No, it's
I
really
really truly do believe that's one of the greatest services we can give to people with this. As much as we want to show them and teach them and help them and fix them and move them and get the, just to listen. And again, it's not easy because I noticed myself like jumping out of my seat, and it's like, Barbara, you're not listening. You're moving into fixing, and as in all fairness to myself and being in the helping profession for 45 years, it doesn't come naturally to me to not want to move right into suggesting or, let me show you how what's happening. But it is truly one of the greatest ways we can be of service to anyone, I believe. And I see that more and more clearly as I get deeper and deeper into this understanding.
This is reminding me of something I heard, I think Mark Howard said, that it's like if you haven't, something comes into your mind that you want to offer as a suggestion, wait 3 times. Wait till it shows up 3 times before you open your mouth. I get to 2.
Keep working at it, Richie.
I'm progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. So we're at the end of our time together, coming to a close, and both the name of the book, Addiction, One Cause, One Solution, and a link to Amazon is in the chat. So feel free to grab that if you haven't already, so you can get a hold of Barbara and Christian's book. And is there anything any words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with, and about the power of service that come to you as we close?
I just feel, oh, well, there
Barbara.
we go. Yeah. No, I think we ended on a really great note with the whole issue of listening. Again, the idea that it isn't necessarily active as much as it is wisdom to know, let me just live my life and shine my light. And when you do that, that power, never underestimate the power of that, of the service of that. When someone truly is just fully who they are and just shine their inner light in a way that, you know, it impacts everyone around them. I've been inundating myself with Tina Turner videos these last few days, and just seeing how she lived her life through all of her hardship and trial by just being who she was, and the impact that that had in so many people's lives. Those are my words of wisdom. How about you, Christian?
No, I don't think I can top that. Let's leave it at that. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to connect with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Barbara.
Barbara
Thanks,
and
Stephanie.
Kristen, for sharing your story, and everyone your questions. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.